What up, friends? Growing up, I question a lot of things about the story. I was being taught in school about history and the things going on around the world. And as I grew up, the more I researched, I found out a lot of those things I was skeptical about were true. And I recall the feeling, pretty young of being duped and like how it felt. And I felt this way another time recently, and it was when I was visiting Washington, D.C. I've been all over the world and to a lot of different cities, and this place creeped me out big time. And I remember looking at the buildings and just being like, "What is this place?" And I remember even posting on Facebook, like, "Why are there so many giant freaking buildings in Washington, D.C., and why is the place so creepy?" So, I'm kind of figuring out now why that was. And basically, we've been trying to make this video for like 2 weeks because this rabbit hole is so immense.
Deep.
It's unlike any rabbit hole I've ever been around. And there's been several rabbit holes I've been down in the past 10, 15 years that have completely changed my life and how I looked at things. And this one is like the mother of all those. This is like the big boss at the end of Zelda. Huge.
This ties a lot of things together.
This ties a lot of things together with our history. And basically is what we're finding out, or what the evidence is pointing at, is that there was a modern culture in the past living in the United States and living all over the world. They had a very vast empire. It is speculated that this empire had free energy technology, and they were quite advanced for their time, them being around in the 16th century to the early 19th century, correct?
Yeah, but I believe so. I mean, it's hard to say.
But basically, if you look at any map or almanac pre-1800s, you will see mention of a place called Tartaria. And it is basically where Russia and Mongolia is in Europe, which is a huge place. And then you will see, if you do more research and find older maps of like the 16th century of North America and the east coast of North America, you will see many cities that are Tartarian cities on the west coast of the United States of America. In what year? 16th century? So 16th century, the 1700s.
Yeah.
There was huge cities, giant buildings. Giant buildings in these cities, a very specific architecture that you will see all over the world, and in every city, just about every city in the United States, you will see an immense amount of this architecture.
Even on the West Coast.
Even on the West Coast. They call it Greco-Roman, they call it Victorian, they call it a lot of things, but those words that they're calling it are simply distractions. We don't really want to get into looking at evidence right now because there's so much, and it's so much that it's almost like both me and her, like, she'll go to work and she'll be looking up some stuff and I'll be looking at things, and we'll just be like, your mind is blown every 30 minutes of research.
Yeah, you can't
down
put it
this
all in
rabbit
one
hole.
video.
We can't.
So
It's
this is
gonna
just
be
the beginning.
Yeah, we're just kind of trying to, we're letting you know that we're going to start making a series looking at this stuff, but everyone, can go do research on this in their own cities because these buildings are everywhere. Some of them have been refaced. Many of them have been refaced.
Yeah,
Many of them have been toned down to not look so old and foreign.
Yeah.
They're very, very ornate, very large castles, basically. I mean, giant buildings that we just weren't making in the early 1800s while we were having wars and basically the United States was, there wasn't anything built here. And it was hard life, and supposedly according to history, we built all these giant buildings in all these cities, these huge tons and tons and tons of buildings with no skilled labor, no, no businesses who have been quarrying, who've been making bricks. Like, this was all from scratch. Like, within 100 years, if you go by history's terms, if you look at pictures of the city you're from in the 1800s, you will see a very specific red brick architecture. Once you start actually researching once you start going down this rabbit hole, you start to you become familiarized with the architecture, and you start to see it everywhere. We've been racking our brains trying to figure out how to explain how immense and connected this rabbit hole is, and how much evidence there is. It's not like we're making, there's no evidence and we're just speculating about history and there's no way of learning anything about it. There's so many strange things involved. There could be 10 movies. I mean, there's so much strange stuff. World's fairs are connected. Freemasons are very much connected. This basically explains the origination and like how Freemasons how they got power in the United States. And it's like there's so many things connected to this. It's crazy, but you have to do a lot of research on your own to really understand how deep this goes. We're like a month deep. I know I've known about the Tartarian Empire for a long time. A buddy of mine, Scotty Hotstetter on Facebook, shout out, bro. He's been talking about it forever. We only recently really dove in this last month, and it's been like nonstop because it's really interesting stuff. And you just get a lot of these. Okay, so like basically there was a reset around 1850, like a major reset where there was this culture basically giving out electricity, possibly, and the powers that be, the robber barons, were like, hey, wait, we could probably manipulate this or exploit this in some way, and these people are just giving it away. There's some people who think that the Tartarians may have been pacifists. There's some people that say the Tartarians were barbarians, so we don't really know. But they were basically, somehow there might have been a cataclysm. There's so much speculation about it, but they vanished somehow. They're just gone. They either, there was either a war and they were wiped off the face of the planet, or it's also something that's important to know is the Tartarians were a very multicultural group, which is strange, obviously, because we're all kind of shoved up in corners with our own people now these days. But this group was supposedly very multicultural, and the more you research and look at old paintings and old things from way back in the time, there's Tartarians hanging out with like Aboriginals, Islanders and stuff, and they're like working together and partying, and they look like they're friends because it seems like, something cool's happening. But we don't really know. But the more you research, the more you kind of learn a little bit about what's going on or what happened. But it's very fascinating if you're into this kind of stuff. This will keep you thinking, and I mean, like I said, your mind's blown every 30 minutes of researching with this stuff, and there's a lot of really good information on YouTube. There's several YouTubers we'll put the link here for, which are dudes that have been doing this for a while, that are gangsters, and they have a lot of really good information, and they have just tons and tons of footage you can look at, and tons of pictures of places and all over the world where you're seeing this same architecture over and over and over and over. And we were taught that this is like local architecture to these regions, but it's not. There's slightly different variations because they're using different types of materials and stuff, but there's this, ongoing, like, oh, well, that's Tartarian architecture. You can just see it, and it's all over the world. And so the Tartarians were allegedly, they had the tech that Tesla was trying to figure out. Tesla might have been, he was just in that region and somehow, hand-me-down through generations maybe learned about electricity, because it seems like that part of Eastern Europe back in the day, they knew how to do stuff with electricity before we did, I'm sure. But all the Tesla coils and all that stuff is possibly a part of the Tartarian architecture, because there's a bunch of unusual and strange things going up with a certain amount of these older buildings having the copper antennas all over the place, conductive material built into the walls, grounds, and then wires come, huge cables coming out, certain places. It was like the buildings that we know now as churches, these buildings seem to be like some sort of energy stations where they would be able to move power to neighborhoods or something like that. There's a lot of, it's really crazy, and then you start looking at places like the Great Wall of China, which is right down there where Tartaria was from, and you look at the wall and you're like, hey, that's just like a power grid, like they're just running power from one end of the country to the other along this brick wall, which the Tartarians, all their stuff is brick. It's all red brick, all bricks, big blocks, big, giant, monolithic types of walls and buildings. And, it never made sense, the Great China Wall, it was defensive perimeters and stuff like that, but then, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a power grid. Maybe there was, maybe everyone knew about free electricity, free tech back then, and everyone had electricity, and we weren't being enslaved by these dickhead robber barons that eventually, they're selling us electricity when we used to get it for free. But anyway, there was a great reset somewhere around like the 49er Civil War, or there's there's back in the 1800s, there was a major reset, and we were lied to about a lot of things. There's, oh boy, yeah, we're gonna be making lots of videos because there's so much stuff. We're just trying to kind of explain, catch your interest a little bit, because we're gonna dive in and make a lot of videos because there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of just analyzing old photos. There's a lot of research and speculation, and one of the creepiest things was one of these guys. I was watching a video. He was talking about uniforms and the War of 1812. The War of 1812 is kind of like a focal point in this reset. And what the Tartarian conspiracy heads think is that the British and Americans were actually fighting the Tartarians, and what was left of their civilization or their people. And there's a lot of compelling evidence that these guys have. It's pretty, and it makes so much more sense. Why it just makes so much more sense, some of the explanations these guys have for what some of the stuff we were taught. And when you know that history is written by the victor, and it's likely that most of our history is BS, when you see stuff like this, it's just like, oh, well, that makes a lot more sense. Like when I visited St. Augustine, Florida, when I was like 11 years old, and you go out and there's a fortress there, and they're trying to say that it's like, 200 years old, and you're like, I don't know, like this thing looks like it's 1,000 years old, and then you find out that these star fortresses are covering California, but we claim to have built them all in the Civil War. And then you dig deeper and you see that these star fortresses are all over the rest of the world. And they all look the same. And they're all, it's crazy stuff. And then if you go on Google Maps or Google Earth and you go and look at the border of like Russia and Mongolia in that region, that's where Tartaria was. It is one of the strangest places I've ever seen in my life on Google Earth or anything I've ever. It is so creepy. It like made me, I was creeped out looking at it on the internet. You know, like super irrational how unusual this place is. It looks like a giant city that was annihilated by huge weapons. And I'm not talking about Russia testing nukes. It's a completely different thing. If anything, that was a cover-up to cover what happened in this region to these people who allegedly had free energy technology back in the day, and were here before we were here. Just look at like again, you can go back to all these maps from pre 17th century. There's just, it's too much. Too many different countries doing too many maps of the place and them being all pretty accurate. And I don't know, you want to take over for a little bit? I'm just going to keep ranting because...
Yeah, no, it's a lot. I don't know, that was a lot. What the crazy thing is, a lot of these buildings that we're talking about, they've actually been demolished. So a lot of them, like you were saying, as far as the evidence.
Oh, well, it's like this. Every city has, there was some fires that demolished half of the city, and, or earthquakes, or there was some natural disasters that, or certain parts of town that would be like kind of condemned, and they would just let everything fall apart there, or they would just torch it all. There was, in the 18 there was 2,000 amusement parks in California in the 1880s?
I think it was something
the
late
electric
1800s.
Parks? Late 1800s. There was 2,000 amusement parks in California that were all exactly the same, but they were owned by several different companies, and they were basically selling, after the reset, after the powers that be had taken free energy away from the people and basically brainwashed the new generations into forgetting about it. They reintroduced it in these electrical parks that all have, they were all owned by different people allegedly, but they're all built the same way. And then they all mysteriously burnt down. Like, there's crazy stories like this where you're just like, what is going on here? Am I living? And then like you can go and, go on Google Earth and look at where these amusement parks used to be, and you can see the parts that they built into there, and it's like, it's all very unusual stuff, but it's such a big expand. It's the biggest rabbit hole I've ever been down in my life, for sure, and there's still so much more, but there's a lot of really good YouTubers, and we're going to be kind of trying to, even like we've figured stuff out that we haven't seen any of these. There's only a handful of YouTubers doing this stuff, and we've figured things out that they haven't seen, and it's really interesting, and like, it's exciting when you find things like that, because we're like, we're all looking, in this certain region of Mongolia, looking at this stuff, freaking out, looking online, not finding any information about why there's like craters and in like where you can see an outline of where a city used to be, and then all the buildings had been blown up to bits, and what else was out there? There's all these hexagon fort-looking things, tens of thousands of them. There's just weird stuff in this region that was Tartaria for thousands of years. And then it just was wiped off the face of our history. No mention of it, but maybe, a few times slightly mentioned on Discovery Channel growing up, just because they know, how come no one ever talks about these guys? Okay, well, throw a little bit in there, but they never went in detail who the Tartarians were. But then if you do go and start looking, it's a wild ride. Yeah, so we'll be spitting videos out on Float about this stuff, and if you guys have any info, I mentioned something on Facebook the other day, and a friend of mine hit me up and was like, I actually worked with a lady who was Tartarian. She says she's a Tartar, and so they're still around, and I bet they know some stuff. Like, I don't know, like if anyone else, it's interesting stuff. But anyway, you think of anything?
No, I think you got it all.
Okay. But anyway, we'll see you guys later.